Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. The Crucible expansion is almost upon us. It is 9 hours until League start as I'm recording this, and this makes this the very last day of spoiler season. Today is both a quiet day and also somewhat of a cleanup day, where a large number of things that were just misinterpreted by players have been corrected by GGG. So we'll go through that. Most of those things are in the recently asked questions. Then we'll have a look at the Tanu Ahi gloves. But one thing that a lot of people have been asking is what's happening with respect to loot filters for 3.21. The answer is that Neversink expects to have his new filters up at filterblade.xyz about 4.5 hours before League start, give or take a little bit. So it may not be exactly on that time frame, it might be a little quicker, might be a little slower, but that's the time frame that he thinks is reasonable for him to hit now. So if you're looking to get one of Neversink's filters, that's going to be the place to do it. Okay, so let's have a look at the changes to the patch notes that have been announced. So the first one is a very, very small change, and this is a corner case related to Vaal Absolution. Helmet enchants that previously granted Absolution duration will now instead grant Sentinel of Absolution duration. The intention here is that GGG don't want the Helmet enchant to negatively affect Vaal Absolution by increasing its soul gain prevention time. They just want it to be a straight upside, and that's what they're going to do there. There are two new Ruthless specific changes. The first one is a buff to the rewards from an Act 10 quest. It's going to give you a Syosa gemstone instead. I think the intention here is that GGG want to reduce the pressure that players feel in Ruthless to set up a mule character. And there is another line that doesn't specify here that it is Ruthless only, although you can tell from its positioning in the patch notes above that it is. Reduce the chance for normal items to drop from Act 6 onwards, and reduce the chance for normal and magic items to drop in map areas. This one really comes down to the numbers on it, and also one thing I don't know here is will this reduce the chance of getting 6 socket items? If it does, it might be a fairly significant nerf to player power in Ruthless. The next change is to splitting steel. Now the key thing that's changing here is that the damage projection is being changed a little bit. This results in a smaller original area of impact and the same size areas of impacts from split projectiles. So this is going to be roughly the same as it was before, maybe a little bit weaker than it was, and it's also picking up a couple of other little bonuses in terms of damage. I think that this is intended to be a wash overall at high gem level, maybe a slight buff, but not very big. But at low gem level, splitting steel is intentionally being nerfed a bit in this expansion, and all of the details of that are in the patch notes. Assailum is getting changed, and the key change that it's getting is that it is now going to have 2 additional maximum snipe stages. This can be a pretty big deal if you're trying to maximize the power of an individual hit for the purposes of bleed or ignite, but bleed's the main way that Assailum tends to get used. And so that is definitely a buff to the item, but I still think it's going to remain mostly off meta. Finally, chance to avoid interruption from stuns is now going to be renamed, and as part of this renaming, it's going to work when you successfully block a stunning hit. So this is a buff to that stat, and it is now going to be written as chance to ignore stuns instead. So that's the changes to the patch notes. Like we said, fairly small stuff there. Let's jump to the recently asked questions where there's a couple of things that are significant. I want to just focus on the ones that are really significant, and the first one is momentum support. A momentum support is miles better than the wording on the gem would indicate. So, when exactly does attack speed change for attack skills using momentum support? Now, the way that everyone that I know of that read momentum support understood the gem was that you make an attack at 0 momentum, and that takes you up to 1. Then you make an attack at 1, that takes you up to 2. You make one at 2, that takes you up to 3, so on and so forth, until you make one at 4, that pushes you up to 5, and then it resets. Actually, your first attack is going to be made, even though it's the one that grants you your first momentum, you're going to have that 1 momentum before the time that's taken for that attack is calculated. So this is going to be a huge improvement for momentum support. This is a much better skill gem than it looked like, and this is actually competitive with faster attacks. This is going to be better than faster attacks if you think you will generally be stopping in place and making a bunch of attacks before you move again. But faster attacks is going to be the better choice if you want a more mobile playstyle. So this definitely has a use case. So this definitely is a big improvement to momentum support over the way that it was originally worded. I do think that GGG could clarify this on the actual text of the gem, because I don't think anyone that reads the text of the gem will anticipate this behavior. Manaforged Arrows says that supported skills trigger when 300% of their mana cost has been spent on other bow attacks. What is that they're referring to? That is referring to the gems that are supported by Manaforged Arrows. So if you have Manaforged arrows linked to Frenzy, and that Frenzy gem's mana cost is 24 mana total after all of the modifications, then that's going to cause Manaforged arrows to trigger every time you spend 72 mana on other bow skills. So that's a clarification there. Now here's the most important one here. How do Vaal Domination and Absolution interact with support gems, and can I use a second copy of these gems to get extra support gem effects on my Ascended Sentinels, or to do all sorts of other things like that? So, Ascended Sentinels are still minions created by the base skill. They are not created by the Vaal skill. That means that they are affected by support gems from the base skill. However, these skills cannot ascend Sentinels that are created by different copies of the gem. So this is something that I certainly read wrong when I was looking through this. If you want to get the benefits of level 21 Vaal Sentinels of Absolution, then you will need to have a level 21 Vaal Absolution gem. You cannot use a level 21 regular Absolution and a level 6 Vaal Absolution. You need to use the same gem in order to ascend those Sentinels. Again, I think the text on the actual gem should be clearer, but that's the way it works. If I ascend a magic or rare Sentinel of Dominance, is it still magic or rare? Does it keep its monster modifiers? Yes, they keep their monster modifiers and they're technically the same rarity, but they no longer count towards the number of Sentinels of that rarity, only the limit of Ascended Sentinels. Vaal Domination will also automatically pick the highest rarity Sentinel that you have in order to ascend. So there's a lot less micromanagement in order to optimize Vaal Domination than we'd originally thought from reading the gem. So those are the changes that are being made to the recently asked questions. Let's have a look quickly at Tanu Ahi. These gloves are very, very strong. They're not universal. They need to be used on certain types of characters, but if you are playing one of those characters, these are really, really good. So we have the big payoff, 10% chance to gain Adrenaline for 2 seconds and Onslaught for 4 seconds when you go from a state of leeching life to ceasing leeching life, and the trigger condition for that is you filling your unreserved life. So when would you use Tanu Ahi on a character? You'd need to have a reasonable expectation that you would be at full life by default when you're in combat, and you would also need to be someone who is attacking very fast, and you would need to be spending life while you're attacking. You can achieve this multiple ways. You can achieve it with life tap support, but I personally think the best way is one of the new masteries, which causes 30% of the mana cost of your skills to instead be a life cost. So a skill that costs 100 mana to cast instead costs 70 mana and 30 life to cast. That would be the perfect setup for Tanu Ahi. If you're attacking fast enough, you will have a very high uptime on both Adrenaline and Onslaught from these gloves. Onslaught will be almost permanently on while you're in combat, and Adrenaline will have a fairly high uptime as well. Even with Adrenaline not having 100% uptime though, it's an extremely, extremely powerful buff, and I do think that these items are going to be great, even though they're in a very, very contested slot. So the glove slot's extremely good. You can very easily craft very strong rares there, and additionally, the unique items in the slot are phenomenal, but Tanu Ahi is going into that category of phenomenally strong unique gloves. This is definitely something to consider on your builds. Of course, we don't know how rare it is going to be. So, I hope you enjoy the Crucible League. I'm not going to be able to play days 1 or 2 very much at all because I've got friends from interstate that are visiting, and as a result, I'm going to have very, very limited playtime. I think there'll be a few people in that situation, what with the whole league start being over Easter, which at least in Australia is the time a lot of people go and visit friends and family interstate. However, I hope you have fun. If you're still trying to decide on a league starter, I'll put a link down in the description of this video to some of the league starters that I've seen online that I think are particularly good. And if you're looking for tips and tricks on how to get yourself your first 6 link of the league, I will also put a link down in the description below to a video that I put out that assesses the various different options that you've got, with a heavy focus on divination cards because they are one of the more reliable methods. And the very last thing that I'll put a link to down in the description below is a massive live stream that I did when we went through the patch notes on Patch Note Day. This is going to extensively discuss all of the changes and what they're likely to mean for your build. It's something to consider playing in the background while you're running through the acts. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results and have fun in the Crucible.